Hello friends, and I don't know why I'm doing this video, but I felt compelled today to share with you my pile of shame. Basically, I don't know if you can tell, but my bookshelves are pretty full at the moment. I've also been in a bit of a reading slump, so not much reading has been going on until recently. But for reasons unknown to you, I, or the divine, I've still been buying books. Of course I have! But with nowhere really to put them, they've all just been kind of like accumulating over here on my reading chair, which obviously means I can't read on that chair. So now it's not like, can we continue calling it my reading chair? Not in good faith. But I thought, seeing as all of the books that I have been buying and acquiring are just kind of sitting here, why don't we make a haul out of it? Some of them you may have seen pop up in vlogs when I've kind of shared a little bit of a haul, but I don't think I've shown you all of these yet. So do your best not to be mean to me, at least in the comments. You can be mean to me in your own head, feel free. I can't stop you, I'm not the thought police. These first books that I have on the top are two books that I picked up from the library. Our libraries around here often have racks or trolleys of books that they're, discontinuing from stock, and they usually sell them for $1. So one of the books that I picked up is a non-fiction called We Can All Be Feminists, and the name of the author is covered up in both places, which is exceptionally helpful. It's edited by June Eric Udori, and essentially this is a collection from 17 writers on intersectionality, identity, and finding the right way forward for feminism. And on the back it asks in big bold letters, how can we make feminism more inclusive? Which is definitely a question I would love to hear answered by 17 different people. I love getting different perspectives on a question like that. I think that is literally inclusion. That's how we move forward towards inclusion, is by listening to different voices. I mean, we don't just stop there, but it's the beginning step, The other reason I picked this book up, aside from it being $1, is because the title reminded me of We Should All Be Feminists by Adichie, which is a book that was very popular, but I didn't like because to me it felt pretty trans exclusionary. And so I was kind of excited to see something that I, at first glance at least, interpreted as a little bit of a response to that book. But how successful that is, or how true my assumption is, remains to be seen. Of course, I have to actually read it to find out. Another book I got from my library is Her Majesty's Royal Coven by Juno Dawson. This is the first in a fantasy series, I think. And I mean, just looking at this, I think it's gonna be witchy as hell. Prepare to be Bewitched by Juno Dawson's first adult series. A story of ancient prophecies and modern dating, a sacred sisterhood and demonic frenemies. I don't know a lot about this, but the librarian who kind of saw me pick this up and have a look at it did say that it's quite diverse and also quite funny. But I've also heard from people since I picked this up that maybe some of the representation isn't great. So I'm honestly not sure exactly what to expect. And to be perfectly honest as well, I don't have set plans of reading this anytime soon. But if you have read this, I would definitely love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think this is something I'm gonna like? Let me know. Next up is a book I pre-ordered the second I heard of it, and it is, of course, Beyond the Story, a 10-year record of BTS. I was surprised by how big this book is and how much text there is. I know that might sound silly, of course a book, you expect it to have text, but this is just text with some pictures. I was kind of expecting Big Hit to, just fill it with pictures. But I feel like this is actually designed to be a solid record of the last 10 years of their career, and I am looking forward to it. Written over 3 years of in-depth coverage, BTS shares personal behind-the-scenes story of their journey so far. So it is massive, but I did also buy a copy from my friend Annie, who is a big BTS fan as well, and we're gonna kind of read it slowly together, a chapter at a time, so we can chat about it. And have a good time reading it. Okay, the next two books I bought because I'm going on a little bit of an historical fantasy kick. I had a realization in this video a while ago that maybe historical fantasy is a path I need to explore more. I just realized that quite a lot of the books that I've really been enjoying in the last year or two, it turns out they're historical fantasy. And so, of course, me being me, I bought a bunch of historical fantasy books, and I'm going to hopefully read them and I don't know, just kind of explore a little bit more of my taste. So one of the books I picked up was called The Monsters We Defy by Leslie Penelope. This is such a pretty cover. And Marie Brennan, the author of one of my favorite series, the Lady Trent memoirs, says, a fresh and engaging take on historical fantasy. It's set in the 1920s, I think in Washington, and it features a black protagonist who can talk to spirits. It seems like there's going to be a bit of a bargaining happening with some of the spirits, which did remind me a little bit of Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk, which has been one of my favorite books that I've read so far this year. It sounds like there's also a heist and a jazz musician who can play like magical music and a really solid mystery. So I think there's quite a lot going on in here, but I mean, it just all intrigued me too much and I had to give it a go. Next is a book I feel like I will either love or hate. I feel like there's not going to be any middle ground, and I'm honestly a little bit surprised with myself. But it's been a long time coming, you know? It's The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. Now, if you have not been here for a little while, last year I read The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern and I hated it. I thought that book was superficial and boring as hell. It was very pretty to read, the atmosphere was lovely, like that element of it I liked, but the characters and the plot I just felt were like pointless. And themes? Like, I mean, there was like a hint at a few themes, but I felt like the author was more interested in like tying herself in circles and proving how clever she was than actually developing interesting, thought-provoking, complex themes, you know? So yes, I have just said some pretty awful things about the author, and here I am buying another book of hers. What is wrong with me? I mean, I ask myself that question all the time. I don't know. I just keep hearing people talk about this book, their love for this book, and also so many other fantasy and like atmospheric fantasy and historical fantasy books are often compared to The Night Circus. Sometimes they're compared to The Starless Sea too, but I feel like The Night Circus was kind of like a moment in that kind of genre, that kind of world. And so I'm curious, I'm just curious. And like I said, I did enjoy the writing itself, which I feel like I can get through most books as long as I enjoy the writing. And who knows, sometimes it's just fun to give an author a second chance. Okay, now moving on to a box set that I purchased myself. I got the Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland, or the Fairyland series, or whatever it's called, by Catherine M. Valente. This is a middle grade series that I think, from what I can gather, seems to have been a pretty big deal on BookTube like 10 years ago, but I wasn't around then. I am, however, today a children's bookseller who loved The Past is Red by Catherine M. Valente that I read last year. That was a novella set like 100 years after the climate collapse, and I just loved it. It was one of those books that I think I gave like around a 4-star at the time. So like I really, really liked reading it, but I didn't think that I loved it. But it just stayed with me. I never stopped thinking about that book and thinking about Tetley, the main character. And so ever since then, I've been thinking I need to read more from the author, and she has a few other like adult works, but I keep coming back to the idea of maybe reading this series. And one day I found this on eBay for an absolute bargain and I caved. I bought it. So the first book in this series is The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making, which like I want to be mad at how long that title is, but I'm not. I kind of love it. So I mean, it is pretty bold of me to purchase an entire 5-book series without even having read one page of the first book. But as I said, this is my pile of shame, so here we are. And to be perfectly honest, I'm such a sucker for a box set or like a collected set, because then you know that all of the books match. And so yeah, if I can get a good deal on like a box set of a series that I know I want to read, like yeah, it's my Achilles heel, my kryptonite, whatever the metaphor is, you know what I mean. Next up, we have a YA book that I was so thrilled to discover. It is We Don't Think It Through by Gary Lonesborough. Now, I have mentioned this a couple of times. Gary Lonesborough is the author of The Boy from the Mish, which is one of my favorite YA books that I've ever read. It's a queer Aboriginal coming of age story, and it's just brilliant. It's both a book we needed and a book that is so beautifully written and utterly compelling. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't even know he had come out with a new book, but on my first day back in the shop, I spotted this on our new releases table and it was just an auto buy. I didn't even read the blurb. I didn't need to. I don't even know what this story is about, but I know like I was gonna read it regardless, and I hope that I love it. Okay, now let's mix it up with some translated fiction. I picked up Where the Wild Ladies Are by Matsuda Aoko. This is translated by Polly Barton, and I honestly don't even know when this came out. It looks like it was published, at least in English, in 2020. It's described on the blurb as witty, inventive, and profound. Where the Wild Ladies Are is a contemporary feminist retelling of traditional ghost stories by one of Japan's most exciting writers. As female ghosts appear in unexpected guises, their gently humorous interactions with unsuspecting humans lead to deeper questions about recent changes in Japanese women's lives. I mean, honestly, that blurb sounds incredible. The title's amazing, but primarily the reason I picked this up is because I'm in a Facebook group. I've been in it for years and I honestly rarely check Facebook. But one day I was checking Facebook and it came up with a big picture of one of my favorite books of all time, There's No Such Thing as an Easy Job by Tsumura. And it's in this group for people talking about Japanese translated works. And this person was asking for recommendations of books like this one. And as I mentioned, this is one of my favorite books ever. So I was keen to read those recommendations. A lot of people said things like Convenience Store Woman, which is a book I had mixed feelings on, but I did enjoy in retrospect. And although that book does have similarities in terms of, like a woman struggling at work, the vibe is completely different. And it's the vibe. It's the vibe that I wanted to capture. And I would just read more Samura, but nothing else by her has been translated into English yet, at least that I know of. So when somebody recommended this, it is translated, as I said, by the same person who translated There's No Such Thing as an Easy Job, but a few people then kind of went, yes, actually that's a great recommendation. So the decision was made for me. I ordered it on the spot. To be honest, I have not read as much contemporary translated Japanese works as I had in the previous couple of years. I've been more kind of exploring genre fiction, but I mean, I think this will be one that I will try and read this year. And I am trying really hard not to get my hopes up too much, but I'm excited about this one. Next up is another example of a book that I bought purely because I'm trying desperately to cling on to the vibes of a book that I adored. Basically, after finishing The Golem and the Jinni duology by Helene Wecker, I wanted more. I just wanted more. I don't know what I wanted more of, but I wanted more of the vibes. But I think that's all she's really published, at least in terms of novels. But I did discover that she has written a short story that is included in this book, The Djinn Falls in Love and Other Stories. We got stories in here by Nnedi Okorafor, Neil Gaiman, and plenty of other names that I do know, but none of them I've read before. So, I mean, I did buy this for the 15 or 20 page story by Helene Wecker, but I intend to read the entire book. It's an enthralling collection of new and classic tales of the fearsome djinn. So I'm trying desperately not to just jump immediately to her story in here, because I feel then it would be all too easy to put this back on the shelf and never get to the rest of it. But I mean, it is tempting when that's the whole reason I bought the book. I don't even know if I've read a short story collection this year. So, I mean, maybe this can be the one. Okay, now let's talk about the 3 books I got at my last Savers trip. These are all YA and middle grade books. So essentially I picked them up for work, but I mean, it's always good to pick up some books that we stock very consistently, and I probably should get around to reading. The first is Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. I've never watched the show, or is it a movie? It's a movie. I've never watched the movie. I've never read the books. I was honestly always a little bit scared to. But I mean, if I can give it a go for a few dollars, why not? And if it is too scary, I will have to put it down. But I'm willing to give it a try. Then a book that I have always been curious about but didn't want to spend full or even, my 40% discount price on. It's The Northern Lights by Philip Pullman. I mean, I know this is an absolute classic. You might also know it as The Golden Compass. It's the first book in the His Dark Materials trilogy. And yeah, I don't really know what to expect. I keep hearing really good things, but I've also heard that it's darker than a lot of people assume it's going to be. I also have to wonder if this is one of those books that has an awful lot of nostalgia attached to it for people. And so, I don't know, maybe as an adult I won't like it quite as much, but I mean, I can't know until I read it. And then a book that is a middle grade book, but we don't really stock very often anymore. I picked it up primarily because it's by one of my favorite middle grade authors. It's A Most Magical Girl by Karen Foxley. So Karen Foxley has written things like Lenny's Book of Everything, which wasn't my favorite, but she's also written Dragonskin, which I loved. And then her current kind of junior to middle grade series is Miss Mary Kate's Guide to Monsters, which I love. It's one of my favorites. I love it so much. So when I saw a cute little hardback copy of one of her older titles, it was just, I had to do it. Even if I don't love all of her stories, I mean, I've only read one I didn't really love. But even if I don't love the story, I always really appreciate her writing and how she writes for children. It never feels like she's writing down. Everything is still very appropriate, but it never feels like it's condescending in any way. It always feels beautiful to read, I suppose. And I do tend to enjoy her more magical stories, so I'm looking forward to trying this one. And all it says on the back is magical machines, mysterious underworlds, and a race against time. I mean, of course, I know there's more of a blurb in the front cover, but I mean, I'm already sold. Okay, next up we have 2 pretty new release fantasy books. I think they'll both release this year that for one reason or another are already being marked down as remainders in Australia. And so I found them at a remainders bookshop and thought, why not? They were both books that I was thinking about reading, but I kind of thought I'd wait until maybe more books in the series came out, wait until they got released in the smaller and more affordable format. But for $10 each, who can say no to essentially 2 new release fantasy books that you wanted to read anyway, The first is The God Killer by Hanan Kana, and I haven't heard about this as much as kind of like before its release, everyone was talking about how beautiful this cover was. And I am surprised at how short it is. It's not even 300 pages. And like, honestly, we need more of that in fantasy. Can we all agree that we need more variety in page length in fantasy? I feel like we either get novellas or we get tomes. We don't get enough of the in-between. And as someone who like very firmly believes that most books would be made better with more editing, like this excites me. And then the next book, which I told myself I wasn't going to get until I read her first trilogy, because I do have the first book of that trilogy, it's The Adventures of Amina AlSarafi by Shannon Chakraborty. It's not the absolutely glorious US cover which we all wanted, but like, I mean, this one's not too bad either. This is a pirate fantasy story, which I mean does sound kind of really fun. Although now I'm kind of stuck, I'm not sure which I should read first, like this one or the Daevabad trilogy. I feel like I should probably get to the Daevabad trilogy first, seeing as, you know, it's completed and I can get into the second and third book when I'm ready, rather than having to wait for it. But at least now I have a nice copy, and so when I'm ready I can find out if this is a world I would like to continue in for a bargain. We love that. The next book I've got is actually another book in translation. It's Honeybees and Distant Thunder by Raiku Onda. I have nothing to say for myself except for the fact that we were in a bookshop, my friend was buying books, I wanted to buy a book, and this one looked pretty and sounded cool. That's my justification. Honeybees and Distant Thunder is a tender and compelling story of courage and rivalry. Most of all, it shows how three young people navigate the highs and lows of what it means to be a true friend. Then a book that I was interested in, but I bought specifically because I felt bad about making the bookseller go get it out of the window. I knew it was in the window, but I was hoping they'd have another copy, and so when I asked for it, she just like went and got it out of the window, and it was a whole ordeal, and so I couldn't bring myself not to buy it after that. It is Goliath by Tochi Yonabuchi. I've always meant to read Riot Baby, but just never gotten around to it, never seen it in a bookstore, never picked it up. And I've heard that this is dense. It's hard to get through, but the people who have managed to get through, a lot of them absolutely recommend the journey and say it's more than worthwhile. It's like a near future tale, I think, and it kind of weaves several different stories and narratives together. All of that does sound quite interesting to me. I am, though, a little bit intimidated by what I've heard of this, and like the tiny typeset is not helping. So I'm not exactly sure when I'm going to get to this. Like I said, it wasn't necessarily like on my plans to get to immediately. I was guilt tripped into buying it, but like I'm not mad that I have it now, you know, and I hope I do get to it sooner rather than later. It kind of reminds me almost of like how I felt about Carpentaria. I mean, Carpentaria is like a classic of Australian literature, so I feel like its shadow loomed large over me for a long time, but it was always a book that I wanted to get to and I knew would be powerful, but I was just like thoroughly intimidated by it. And it was hugely difficult to get through, but I am so glad that I did. So I do need to hold that in the back of my mind. Like, some books are work, but they're worth that effort. A book I don't think is going to be a whole lot of work is Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers. Tea shop owner, matchmaker, detective, ? I have been reading a little bit more like cozy, fun mysteries in the last year, and like, I mean, this just seemed like it ticked all those boxes, and so I bought a copy. Like, I don't have some deep explanation for this one. Next up is the one book that I actually have started. I've nearly finished this book. It's Love and Autism by Kay Kerr. Kay Kerr is an autistic Australian author who has written a couple of YA books, one of which is called Social Cue, and it's such a fun, sweet book. Kind of got like rom-com vibes. It's really good. This, though, is a non-fiction title in which Kay Kerr explores different experiences of autism. Basically, throughout the book, she interviews 5 different people who are autistic, and the book's kind of separated into different sections, and it explores their experience with friendships, relationships, and love. She also interweaves her own story throughout as well, and so far I'm just absolutely loving it. A couple of other non-fiction books I picked up recently. The first is The Electricity of Every Living Thing, A Woman's Walk in the Wild to Find Her Way Home by Catherine May. Apparently it's a life-affirming exploration of wild landscapes, what it means to be different, and above all, how we can learn to make peace with our own unique minds. Oh, sorry, it's not unique, it's unquiet minds. Then we've got this one, Divergent Mind, Thriving in a World That Wasn't Designed for You. It's a paradigm-shifting study on neurodivergent women. It's a pretty short book, but I feel like it might read a little bit more dense than things like Love and Autism. But it explores things like autism, synesthesia, ADHD, and specifically how a lot of women experience those things. I think this might be the only proof on this list. It's Little Plum by Laura McPhee Brown. I don't know if you'll remember, but a couple of years ago I read her debut novel Cherry Beach, and it was one of my like highly anticipated releases of that year. and I loved the writing. The writing was beautiful, but the story itself and the characters did not like. It was framed as like a really kind of complex, nuanced, powerful relationship between two women, like the friendship between them and the complexities of that friendship. But instead, one of the characters just was like a manic pixie dream girl, and the other one had no agency in the story. Like the story just happened to her. And there was also just like a suggestion around mental health at the end that I didn't appreciate either. It wasn't like horrible, but I didn't like it. You know what I mean? But I did in the back of my head always kind of think that maybe for her next release, I would give her another go. Now this has been out for like, I don't know, a year or so, or at least 6 months. It came out last year, I think. And like I've seen it in bookshops, but never quite gone to the step to actually purchasing it. But for some reason, even though I work in a children's bookstore, like we received an ARC, like a proof for the book. And so when I saw it, I thought, why not? Why not give her a second go? At the very least, I'll have it on my shelf for a while. And if I get to it, I get to it. If I don't, it's not the end of the world. I can pass it on. Cherry Beach, in the sense that I get from this book, it's like very millennial lit fic, you know? And like, I mean, I'm usually here for that sort of stuff. So I'm willing to give her another go. I just wasn't really willing to pay for it. At least not yet. Then a couple of comic books. I went to a comic book store recently to pick up an order for a friend. And I mean, I got chatting to the bookseller there and he made a couple of recommendations and I bought myself some books. The first is Middle West, The Complete Tale by Scotty Young and George Corona. So I think this did originally come in smaller volumes and this is just kind of like an omnibus collection of the entire series. Yes, collects Middle West numbers 1 to 18 with exclusive bonus features. This story does follow a child, but I was told in no uncertain terms that this is definitely like an adult work. I think it does deal with some pretty dark themes, potentially around like abuse and domestic violence. But I think there's also talking animals. Don't quote me on that. It's just vaguely what I remember and like I'm low-key hoping for, but yeah, I don't know. I've never read comics before. Obviously, I love graphic novels and manga. Comics though is new to me, so I just thought I'd give it a go. The other thing I was recommended while I was in there is Monstrous. This is by Marjorie Liu. This is something that I've seen a little bit around and I've heard good things about, but I don't know the specifics. It looks a little bit scary though, like just having a bit of a flick through. It looks a little dark. It's set in an alternate world of Art Deco beauty and steampunk horror. Yeah, okay, it's horror. So again, we'll just have to see how I go with this one. It's only the first volume, so it'll be fun to try at the very least. Then another book that I did get from Savers, although honestly I'm already kind of thinking about passing it on without having read it, is The Rivers of London by Ben Aronovich. This is the first book in a series. What's the series called? The Peter Grant series. I think it's urban fantasy, but like detective story as well. And I always see these covers and I always really like these covers whenever I see them in a bookshop. I haven't actually heard a lot about this series or whether people actually like it. I think the only thing I've heard recently, which has kind of made me reconsider getting into this series, is I think it was from Becca, who said something about how there's now like a graphic novel series, which was supposed to be separate to this series. Like you didn't have to read both, but now they're kind of starting to interweave where you do have to read both. And I mean, a fantasy series is already a commitment. I don't know that I'm ready to commit to a fantasy series mixed in with a graphic novel series that I'm already well behind in, you know? So I would love to hear below if you've read this series. Do you think it's something that I would like, knowing my reading taste? Or is it something that I should just kind of like tap out of before I even get started? Let me know. Like I said, I got the book from Savers, so it's not like it would be a massive loss. And honestly, I would rather know now before starting to get invested. And then finally, yes, we are finally making our way towards the end of this unnecessary and ridiculous haul. I bought books 2 and 3 of the Kingston Cycle series, I think it's called. I've got Witchmark, the first book. These are by C.L. Polk, who like I'm just having a really good year with this year. What can I say? I've recently read The Midnight Bargain. I don't know if that video is coming out before or after this one, but I'm going to be reading a bunch of historical fantasy books and I read that one and I guess spoilers if it's not already up, I loved that book. So it's like a 2 for 2 for C.L. Polk so far. And I have noticed that these books are getting a little bit difficult to get in Australia. I don't know if they're going to reprint them. I don't know if they're coming out with new covers soon or something. But like these editions just seem to be low in stock right now. And so I managed to find both of them on eBay for a pretty good price and thought I'd just pick them up now. Better be safe than sorry. I can't stand the idea that I might be on the precipice of finding a new favorite author and then I wouldn't be able to finish the series, you know? I mean, it's very optimistic thinking. I haven't even read the first book in the series, but I mean, I'm ready to go when I get there. Okay, I think that's it. I think we've finally done it. Those are all, or at the very least most, of the books that I've hauled recently that have been languishing here on my reading chair. As I said, I'm hoping to get to do like a shelf clear out and reorganization soon, so hopefully there will be room for these books up there sooner rather than later. But at least now I have been honest with you. I have shared my shame. I hope at the very least you enjoyed chatting about these books. Let me know in the comments below if there's any books in particular that you think I should prioritize, that you think I would really love, or that you would like to hear my thoughts on. As always, a big thank you to my wonderful patrons over on Patreon, and especially big thank you goes to Livia, Lynette Brown, and Marie. And a big thank you to you for watching all the way through this video. I hope you had a good time hanging out with me. I will talk to you in the comments below and in the next video. Until then, happy reading. Bye.